Hey, hey, hey! My name's Helium the Scripted, or Nephilim if you'd prefer. Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. After the cliffhanger ending of the last chapter, I am back once again with the 5th chapter of Sitting in a Tin Can, written by Aurorian on AO3. But before that, here are the trigger warnings. This fanfiction includes topics that may be triggering to some viewers. If you are likely to be affected by any of the following: implied homophobia, implied prostitution, and implied drug dealing, then please consider listening to another one of my videos, such as the Adro series, which is written by XX Cypress Minerva XX. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 5. Made the Grade. It wasn't like Awizumi didn't notice Oikawa slowly pull away from him over the weeks after the Spring Nationals had ended. Krasno hadn't won, but they got far for a team that hadn't even won the Inter-High in years. If Awizumi wasn't still bitter about their loss, he'd be kind of impressed. He suspected that Oikawa had been the same. In true Shitty-Kawa fashion, he had been very vocal about how much he hated them and how much he wished that a cruel death would be thrust upon Kageyama all the way up until they lost. And then it was radio silence. And then he began jogging to school an hour before Awizumi's first alarm even rang. And he stayed after school to practice until his mother called his phone at least 3 times to get his ass home. You should rest, Awizumi insisted after a fortnight of the odd new routine. I don't want you hurting yourself before you get any V-League offers. Oikawa smiled brightly, but it was the bitter one. The one reserved for Kageyama and Ushijima. The LED lights in the locker room seemed to make it look a lot more sinister than it was. Oh, Iwa-chan. He shook his head like he was humouring a child that thought the moon was made out of Swiss cheese. Why would I, the captain of a losing team, get any offers to join any team in the V-League? I'll be lucky if Takuru's class even let me teach them anymore. Awizumi watched him roll his compression sleeve down on his right leg, and resisted the urge to smack him across the head. Don't be a dumbass, Oikawa, he said. You're the best setter in the fucking prefecture. Why wouldn't you get any offers? Oikawa sighed wistfully. I don't know. He tapped his lips with his index finger and hummed deeply. Maybe because I couldn't bring my team to the Nationals, or maybe it's because we lost to a team who didn't even have a coach, a libero, or an ace the first time we played them. There could be a lot of reasons. Awizumi straddled the bench Oikawa was sitting on, and pushed his left foot away to give himself room. This shit again? Are you fucking kidding me? He demanded. I thought we dealt with this in middle school. You can't win by yourself in volleyball. You carry your team, and your team carries you. There is no star, and there isn't one sole person responsible for winning or losing. Oikawa stood up from the bench and grabbed a pair of sweatpants from his locker, and stepped into them. Awizumi tried to ignore the way he was glaring at the floor. They stayed in silence as Oikawa changed out of his practice gear. The shuffling of clothes was a lot louder in the tiled walls of the locker room. Oikawa's voice came out louder than before, louder but a lot softer, and a lot more vulnerable. Then why does it feel like it's my fault? Awizumi felt himself blink. He knew that Oikawa was feeling the burden of their team's loss. He'd known since he let himself cry into Awizumi's shoulder. He knew that Oikawa's pride had been injured. But for some reason, he hadn't realised that Oikawa's faith in himself and his playing had been too. Awizumi sighed and got off the bench to stand behind Oikawa. He was facing his locker, rooting around in spare clothes and old volleyball magazines that had his picture printed on the cover with articles to match. even though he had nothing to look for. Iwaizumi stepped closer and put his hands on Oikawa's waist. "You don't need to worry about that shit." He leaned his forehead against the back of Oikawa's hair and pressed a small kiss to the skin just beneath his hairline. "Because you played your best, and so did the rest of the team. Maybe sometime we'll get together again and beat the shit out of Karasuno. But you can't keep thinking that losing was your fault, when it wasn't." Maybe it was the wrong thing to say, or maybe Oikawa was still bitter, because instead of accepting Iwaizumi's affection and returning it, Oikawa turned around in his arms and looked down. "I have a girlfriend," he said, and Iwaizumi dropped his hold on his friend's waist like it burned. "What?" he asked, and took a step back. Oikawa turned back around to close his locker. "I have a girlfriend," he said, and enunciated his words because he was being a little shit. Oikawa grabbed his duffel bag and put the strap over his shoulder. "Don't worry, Iwa-chan." He walked towards the door without turning back to look at Iwaizumi. "Don't think me losing was your fault, when it wasn't." The way he parroted Iwaizumi's words back to him with narrowed eyes and the deepest frown was one of the things that hurt the most. They didn't speak. Oikawa continued to overwork his body, and Iwaizumi tried to watch from afar. But it got painful, more and more as time went by, and the girl clinging to Oikawa's arm continued to show up. He got updates from Maki and Matsun as often as he could, but they drifted away from volleyball to focus on their studies, and began seeing Oikawa less too. But they did occasionally, and whenever they did, they tried to push Iwaizumi into also seeing him. "He's not doing too hot, Iwaizumi," Maki said one day in late February. "I swear to God, he's out of control," Matsun added on. "He's all skin and bones because all he eats is milk bread." "He's suffering from liver failure too. Not a single drop of water has touched his lips. He needs you to survive." Iwaizumi glared at his friends because he had seen Oikawa in the hallway outside his classroom 2 hours ago. He didn't look good, but he looked alive and breathing. "He doesn't want to talk to me," he said with a frown. "And quite frankly, I don't want to talk to him either. He was an asshole the last time we had a proper conversation, and I don't want to repeat." "Dude, you're killing us here!" Matsukawa rolled his eyes and sighed to the heavens. "You two need a kiss and make up so we can go to that club that just opened and be happy, carefree teenagers who'll probably never see each other again after high school." And eventually Iwaizumi ended up calling Oikawa. Calling was good. Calling meant he didn't have to look at him, and that meant that he wouldn't feel the guilt that bubbled up in his stomach every time he saw his childhood best friend. Guilt that Iwaizumi knew was uncalled for. He hadn't done anything to Oikawa, but maybe not doing anything for Oikawa was why he felt guilty. Maybe Oikawa was trying to show Iwaizumi how he felt, how he blamed himself for something that wasn't even his fault. Nevertheless, he called him. Sure, it was almost a month after Hanamaki and Matsukawa told him to try and patch things up with Oikawa, but better late than never. "Hey, Iwa-chan." Oikawa's voice was muffled by the phone held up to Iwaizumi's ear. "Hey, Oikawa," he replied and tried not to sound like he missed him too much. "How are you?" Oikawa snorted. "Fine. I'm heading out to Argentina next week, so I'm excited." He didn't sound excited, but maybe that was just because he was talking to Iwaizumi. "I told you you'd get offers." "Not the way I wanted, though," he answered, and it wasn't strained like he thought it would be. So Iwaizumi let himself smile. "I'd say it's better," he said. "You get to go to the other side of the world. I'm sorta jealous." "What? Why?" There was shuffling on the other side of the phone. "Aren't you planning on going to California in your second year of uni?" I think Maki said something about it. Oizumi hummed. Yeah, I gotta study my English. Which is such a bummer. Wish they spoke Spanish in California. Oizumi could hear Oikawa's pout. Then we could study together. I know we're in the middle of a fight, but I want to hang out with you before I leave. We don't have to study to hang out. I could go over to yours, or you could come over to mine. Iwa-chan! Come to ground control with us. We can dance and drink. It'll be fun. Who else will be there? He said because he felt like he had to ask. Oikawa was silent. Maki, Matsun, me, and Asuka-chan. Asuka-chan. I don't think I should. You understand? He said quietly. Yeah, I guess. Anyway, Oikawa took a deep breath. I'll talk to you later, Iwa-chan. When they hung up, Oizumi never heard back from Oikawa. But he was okay with that because Oizumi had planned on surprising him when he came back from Argentina. He was supposed to come back home for a week after 2 months abroad. But he never showed up. Hanamaki lives in Tokyo, but Matsukawa lives in Sendai. Oizumi explained and took a mouthful of the mapo tofu Daichi had just brought back from the microwave. I can probably convince Maki to come visit, so we don't have to go all the way to Tokyo. Suga sat back on the couch and shook his head with a quiet laugh. I can't believe you didn't think to question them before, he said. They're at the airport with Oikawa. Daichi felt his face grow hot. I told you, I'm not a detective, and they were cleared last time they were questioned. Suga laughed behind his hand, and even though the laughter was at Daichi's expense, he felt like he couldn't take his eyes away. Something about Suga's laugh had always been carefree. It was loud and honest, and it made Daichi want to laugh too. Why were they cleared? Oizumi asked and stabbed a piece of tofu with one of his chopsticks. The police must have done a half-assed job the first time around if the three of us have found a stronger lead than they had. It wasn't even hard, so what the fuck were they on that they missed it? He had brought up a good point. Finding out that a woman had appeared out of thin air mid-flight should have been a breakthrough in the case 5 years ago. But nothing in the report that Kondo had given Daichi even indicated they found anything. When I was given the case file, one of the old detectives told me that Chief Suzuki let me reopen the case because he didn't think I could solve it. Daichi propped his elbow up on the arm of the couch and leaned his chin on the palm of his hand. She sort of implied that the police didn't want to find Oikawa. He watched the lines between Oizumi's eyebrows become more pronounced as he frowned. It wasn't like he was some kind of drug lord or serial killer. Why would the police try to cover up his disappearance? And you didn't notice anything before he disappeared? Daichi asked. Maybe he was in trouble with the wrong kind of people. Oizumi shook his head. No way, he was a piece of shit, but he wasn't like that. He distanced himself, but that was because of something else. That was surprising to Daichi. He didn't know Oizumi very well, but he knew that he and Oikawa had grown up together. He was the vice captain of their volleyball team, and if their relationship was anything like his and Suga's, something must have happened. Or maybe nothing had happened, because hadn't Daichi and Suga fallen apart? They'd been close, but they drifted away from one another. Either way, Oizumi was sure Oikawa hadn't been involved in anything illegal, which meant that the police had tried covering up an innocent 18-year-old's disappearance. Can you call Matsukawa and Hanamaki and have them meet us soon? I'm free Saturday and Sunday, Suga asked. Same with me, Daichi agreed. Awaizumi shifted his weight to one side and pulled his phone out of his back pocket. I have to work on Sunday, so Saturday it is, he said and dialed a number. Awaizumi squished his legs behind Daichi's chair and grumbled something too low for Daichi to hear. What was that? He asked and looked at Awaizumi through the rearview mirror. He turned to look out the window. Why do I have to sit in the back? He asked. I'm the tallest. I should be riding shotgun. Daichi shifted his gaze to Suga, who was sitting next to him with a grin. Suga's hazel eyes met Daichi's, and he winked before turning around in his seat to face Awaizumi. Well, it's Daichi's car, so he can't sit in the back, he pointed out. Awaizumi stared at Suga for a second. If anyone should sit in the back, it should be you, 175 centimeters. The snort of laughter came out of Daichi's nose involuntarily, but he couldn't help it. The look on Suga's face. At the sound, Suga looked back at Daichi. You really shouldn't act so high and mighty. You're literally only 2 centimeters taller than me. Daichi shrugged. 2 centimeters is still taller. Suga slapped a hand against the tan skin on Daichi's forearm. You're kicking me to the back? He asked, and Daichi felt his throat run dry as Suga's thumb massaged tiny circles into the stinging skin. He cleared his throat. Course not, he said and glanced back. Sorry, Awaizumi. Suga gave his arm one last squeeze, turned back to face the front window, and looked out at the traffic. Daichi glanced in the rearview mirror again, and watched as Awaizumi mouthed, Whipped! With a knowing look at Suga. Daichi promptly adjusted his chair to give himself more legroom. He ignored Awaizumi's grunt of discomfort. He looks like he works in a funeral home. Suga nodded sagely as they stood outside Matsukawa's place of work. I remember thinking he looked very Burton-esque. If Daichi was being honest, he wasn't able to put a name to the face because he hadn't been sure which one was Hanamaki and which one was Matsukawa. Considering Suga's description, Matsukawa was probably the middle blocker. If that was the case, Daichi thought that Suga's description was pretty accurate. He did have a depressing air about him. Maybe it was the hooded, tired eyes, or the combination of dark hair and pale skin. But he definitely looked like an extra in a Tim Burton movie. Awaizumi checked his phone. You sort of forget how depressing he looks once he opens his mouth, he muttered as his thumb scrolled across the screen. He acts like a big child, especially if Maki is with him. It's like they forget they aren't teenagers anymore. Aren't we waiting for him to finish his shift or something? Daichi asked. Because it seems like no one's in. He looked through the window. The lights were shut off, and it seemed that everything had already been locked up. Awaizumi nodded and tucked his phone into his back pocket. He said he should be out soon, he said and cranked his neck to peek in through the glass. He just texted me. Unfortunately, soon apparently meant 20 minutes to Matsukawa, who finally strolled around from the back of the building. Hey, Awaizumi! Matsukawa smiled lazily at the trio by the door. Sorry that took so long. Awaizumi stepped forward and patted Matsukawa on the back slightly harder than what Daichi would consider casual. Whatever, he replied. Hurry up and bring us back to your place. I need to be back before 10 so I can start my shift. Matsukawa looked past Awaizumi at Daichi and Suga. Hey, it's Karasuno! He waved with a small salute-like flick of the wrist. Can't believe you went to the dark side, he said to a wise me, and placed his hand on its heart. I'm so disappointed in you. What will Maki say? Probably something dumb, he replied, like that I went to the dark side. Matsukawa snickered lightly, and shrugged one shoulder. Fair enough. He walked down the sidewalk, and Daichi, Suga, and Iwaizumi followed. The short walk to Matsukawa's apartment was quiet. Daichi and Suga fell a little behind as they watched the two men in front of them make the obligatory catch-up small talk. We should get everyone together when we find Oikawa, Suga said with a smile. We'll have a Karasuno Alba Josei rematch. It was a nice thought, unrealistic considering the fact that Hinata was in Brazil, Kageyama was playing professionally, Nishinoya was travelling the world, and Oikawa had been missing for 5 years. But nice. We totally win, he said back, even though it definitely wasn't true. Hinata, Kageyama, and surprisingly Tsukishima were the only ones who still played volleyball competitively. Suga puffed out an amused breath. 100%. Daichi was sure he'd also knew how unlikely it was that they would win, so he laughed. Suga looked at him with his lips pressed tight. I don't know why you're laughing, Sawamura. Suga's eyebrows furrowed together, but Daichi could see him biting his cheek. I'm serious. We would kick their flat little asses. Daichi nodded. Mm-hmm. He hummed. I'm sure we could. Suga grinned as he looked down at the sidewalk. Of course we could, he said and looked back up at Daichi. Our fearless captain wouldn't have it any other way. Suga nudged him in the ribs. Now let's catch up to the others and finally get some answers. He walked a few steps ahead and Daichi found it hard not to follow. He felt that pull in his chest, the one that told him that they were always meant to follow each other, because even though Daichi had been the captain and Suga had been the vice, they had always been on even ground. They led each other equally, and Daichi didn't think that would ever change. Hanamaki was sitting on Matsukawa's couch playing some racing video game that Daichi had never heard of before. He was tapping away at the buttons on the controller and looked up when they walked through the door. When he realized who they were, his eyes widened and then scrunched up as he smiled. Karasuno! He said and paused the game. When Iwaizumi said he was bringing some people, I didn't expect you guys. Daichi wondered if Iwaizumi had told Hanamaki and Matsukawa that he was there to ask about Oikawa's disappearance, because their nonchalance was making him doubt it. Hanamaki's bare chest was littered with hickeys, and he was reclining casually on the couch, in sweatpants like a woman in a Renaissance painting. Hey Hanamaki, Suga said and raised a hand in greeting. Hanamaki waved back. Sugawara and Sawamura, right? God, I still can't believe you guys beat us. Hanamaki sat up and scooched over on the couch to make room. Iwaizumi took a seat, and Daichi did the same, sitting in between the two of them, because he wasn't sure what else to do. Matsukawa and Suga followed suit, and sat on the two armchairs on either side of the couch. So, Matsukawa clapped his hands together. You guys have some questions about Oikawa? Daichi was a little surprised that they did know. He cleared his throat. Yeah, he said. We saw a few things on some security cameras that we need to check with you. The two former teammates exchanged a quick glance before they both simultaneously turned their attention back to Daichi. In the airport? Matsukawa asked. We dropped Oikawa off before his flight, but that was the last we both saw of him. Daichi took out his phone and pulled up the picture of the mystery woman. Well, first I would like to know who this is, he said and passed his phone to Hanamaki. He took the phone and stared at the screen for a second before nodding slowly, Daichi watched his pink hair fall into his eyes, and he waited. He reached over the arm of the couch and held the phone out to Matsukawa. "You mind if I ask why?" he said, and handed the phone back to Daichi. He swallowed and looked at Suga, who shot him an encouraging thumbs up. He had that expression he used to wear back in high school, the one that he used on Hinata when he was teaching him new hand signals, or when Yamaguchi failed to nail a jump floater and needed a little motivation. He turned away, feeling a little warm, knowing that Suga was helping him, even from across the room. "You guys went to a club with her the night before Oikawa went missing," Daichi explained, and scrolled through his camera roll until he found a photo that he had taken of the woman at ground control. Hanamaki looked at the photo, and then at Matsukawa, and then at Iwaizumi. "You should probably ask Iwaizumi who she is," he said instead of giving a direct answer. "Surprised you haven't already." Daichi turned to the bartender with an accusation already on his tongue, but Matsukawa spoke up. "Nah." He battered at the air and rested his elbows on the arms of the chair. Iwaizumi avoided her like the plague. He wouldn't recognize her by her side profile, let alone in a dark club. Daichi felt Iwaizumi tense up beside him, and he turned to him again. "Fuck! That's Hirama Asuka," he said, and took Daichi's phone. He zoomed in on her face. "She was Oikawa's girlfriend." "We only hung out with her a few times," Hanamaki explained. "We had mutual friends, and she was surprisingly good at holding her drink. But other than that, I knew her as one of Oikawa's fangirls. I haven't heard much of her since he vanished, but I can give you her address if you need to ask her some questions." "I'd appreciate it. Thanks," Daichi said. Judging by the look on Iwaizumi's face, Daichi planned on visiting tomorrow, when the former was working. Daichi knew Iwaizumi as someone strong, physically and emotionally. He was able to spike through a 3-person block on the court, and had held up pretty well during their investigation so far. But his walls seemed to be crumbling in front of Daichi's very eyes. And he knew in that moment that there was something more to his relationship with Oikawa. Because if Suga had a significant other who had possibly played a part in his disappearance, Daichi knew that he would look like that too. Hirama Asuka lived in a pretty quiet area in Miyagi. The garden outside her home was riddled with intentionally planted wildflowers and neatly trimmed rose bushes, which had seemed to attract a small crowd of tiny butterflies that filled the air with tranquility, that had Daichi's shoulders relaxing and his breath coming in softer. The windows by the door were open wide, and the sun beamed down onto her porch. The air around Hirama's house just felt cleaner to Daichi. Suga whistled. "This is a nice place," he said, and opened the painted white metal gate with a long creak. "Yeah." Daichi agreed, because it was. He had wanted to start gardening last spring, but he'd been so swamped with work that he hardly had the time. "Maybe I should do something like this with my house." "You should," Suga said with a nod. "I think your yard needs a little bit of added spice." They stepped onto Hirama's porch and walked up to the door. "Gee, thanks," he said, and knocked on the wood. Suga huffed out a short breath of laughter and bumped their hips together. "Don't worry, Dai." Suga smiled brightly at him, and Daichi felt his stomach do a tumble. "I'll help you out." Daichi didn't have the time to ponder on the implication that they would still see each other after this whole Oikawa fiasco blew over, because the wooden door opened widely. "Can I help you?" A woman, Daichi assumed that this was Hirama, asked with a somewhat confused smile. Daichi cleared his throat and bowed. "Sorry for intruding like this," he said, and straightened himself back up. "We're with the police. We just have a few questions for you about Oikawa Toru." He watched Hirama tuck a lock of black hair behind her ear. She nodded quickly and took a step away from the door to let them in. "Yes, of course," she said. "This is a little unexpected." Daichi stepped through the door and watched Suga as he took off his shoes. "Sorry about dropping in on you so suddenly," the teacher said and lined his shoes up next to Daichi's. "We need to clear a few things up, is all." Hirama smoothed out the fabric of her light blue knitted sweater and, with a deep breath, she turned on her heel. "I'll put on a pot of tea." She all but speed-walked into the kitchen and out of sight. "Suspicious, right?" Suga whispered to Daichi, and they followed Hirama at a much slower pace. Daichi nodded in agreement. "Very," he muttered back. They walked through the doorway that Hirama had disappeared through, and the woman looked back at them with a strained smile. "You can go ahead and sit in the living room." She gestured to the ceramic teapot she was holding. "I'll be there in just a sec." They walked through the kitchen and towards the sofas, a few meters away. With another exchanged glance, Daichi and Suga sat down next to each other, in silence. Daichi glanced over his shoulder, thankful for the open floor plan so he could keep an eye on Hirama as she waited for the kettle to boil. She fidgeted with the hem of her cream-coloured skirt and shuffled her feet as she waited. "Do you think she killed him?" Suga whispered, and Daichi jumped at the close proximity. He pulled his eyes away from Hirama, who had taken out her phone, and faced Suga. He hadn't pulled away, and Daichi could feel his breath on his cheek from how far he had leaned in. "Huh?" Daichi asked, and felt his eyes drift down Suga's face. He watched pink lips stretch into a wide smile, and Suga leaned in just a bit closer. "I said, do you think she killed him?" It took a second to process the question, but when his brain had finally caught up, Daichi reeled back. Suga covered his mouth to muffle his laugh, and Daichi scowled back. "Oh my god, Suga!" he said. "No, I do not think that." Suga shrugged and turned away with a wide smile, before standing up and reaching a hand out to Hirama. "Let me help you with that," he said, and placed a hand underneath the tray she was trying to balance with one arm. "Thank you," she said with a weak smile, and adjusted the 3 types of milk she had been holding in her other hand with a sigh of relief. "I should have asked what kind you wanted." She laughed quietly, and placed 3 cartons on the coffee table next to the tray Suga had just put down. "I have whole milk, oat milk, and almond milk." "Whole is fine," Daichi said, and Hirama poured out a cup of black tea from the pot and handed it to him. A few minutes went by, the silence filled with idle small talk and the sounds of spoons clinging against ceramic cups. And after a moment, Hirama sat on the love seat across from the sofa Daichi and Suga were sitting on. She cradled her cup in her hand and tucked the same lock of hair behind her ear. "You wanted to ask me some questions?" she asked. Daichi set his cup back down onto his tray. "They're pretty straightforward," he said, and took a notebook out of his pocket. "And it shouldn't take long." Hirama tapped her pink nails against her cup, and Daichi thought it looked almost involuntary, like she didn't even realize she was doing it. She was nervous. Very obviously nervous. And before Daichi could even open the notebook to ask her the first question, there was a knock on the door, and Hirama shot to her feet. Daichi watched a few drops of tea splash her sweater, but Hirama didn't seem to notice. "I'll be back in a few minutes," she said with an audible gulp and a queasy smile. "No problem," Suga said. "Oh, wait, could you point me to the restroom before you go?" Hirama glanced at the door and nodded. "Upstairs, first door on your left," she said, and then scurried away with a loud breath of air. "Perfect." Suga grabbed Daichi's hand, which he tried not to think about too hard, and stood up. "Let's go." "Why am I going to the bathroom with you?" Daichi asked and let Suga drag him up the stairs by his wrist. Suga stopped at the top of the stairs and shushed Daichi. The sound of Hirama's nervous chatter fluttered up the stairs, and Suga pulled Daichi past the bathroom. "You're not," he whispered and opened the door that was definitely not the first door on their left. "We're snooping through her room." Daichi felt his jaw fall open. "Suga, that's illegal," he said, and watched Suga peek into her room, and then closed the door with the click of his tongue. They moved on to the next room. "So it's murdering someone and covering it up!" Suga's face lit up as he opened the door. "Here we go." He tugged Daichi through the door. "Go look on that side. I'll look over here." Daichi moved over to the side of the room Suga had pointed to, and began rifling through her shelves. She seemed to be pretty average in terms of interior design. She had the usual things, pictures of her and her friends, books, a few souvenirs from what Daichi assumed were vacations, etc. "Hey, Dai," Suga said after a minute of frantic but silent snooping. "Yeah?" he replied and opened up her sock drawer. The sounds of clothes hangers moving across a rack snatched his attention away from Hirama's drawer. "Can I see that picture of Hirama at the airport again?" Daichi furrowed his eyebrows and pulled out his phone to show Suga the picture. He walked to the other side of the room and tilted the phone so Suga could see. Suga frowned as he looked at Hirama in the picture. "What's wrong?" Daichi was beginning to get a little concerned. Suga's silence had become unsettling. He turned back to the closet and began to pull something off the rack. "It could be a coincidence, but didn't you say something about this dress? She's not wearing it in the picture, but I'm not sure a lot of people would have a dress like this in their closets." Daichi paused and watched Suga hold the ugly highlighter pink dress with olive green flowers in front of him. "I'm sure they don't," Daichi agreed. The sound of the bedroom door opening caught their attention, and they turned to see Hirama standing in the doorway with a quivering lip. What are you doing in here?" she asked breathlessly. "Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. Today is my best friend Denki's birthday, so I'd appreciate it if you wish them a happy birthday in the comments. Happy birthday, Denki! If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction, Aurorian, on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so, though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing, my sunflowers. Mwah!